So I'm writing a book, and guess what's happening? They'll have a convention somewhere, and the general manager, this was in San Francisco, and the general manager of the hotel at the time was Ed Mady. He's now the general manager of the Beverly Hills Hotel in the Dorchester collection. But Ed Mady and I run down from the convention space to flip it into a dining space. You know, why is the general manager of a hotel actually hands-on moving tables and schlepping things? Because they really are in the service of their teams, in the service of their customers. And, you know, I think you can get to a place as a leader where you don't realize that that's your customer. That is the person that you're reliant on, that you need to influence so that they can influence the positive experience of your guest or your end user.
All right. Joseph, thank you so much for being willing to be on the show. I'm a huge fan of your work, and every time I read your book on the Ritz Carlton, I get fired up. I was just emailing the CEO this morning on insights that I grabbed from it that are fresh on my second time through. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's very kind of you, and I am a fan of the notion that you want to create fans out of customers. So let's have a conversation.
Awesome. So, you know, kind of jumping into it with some quick stuff. You know, you're an author, you're a speaker, you're a coach. You've got a great list of accomplishments. You know, what are you into outside of work?
Well, I love to hike. I haven't done as much of that as I should with all of the work that seemed to pile on in what should have been a more relaxed time, right? The pandemic, it should have been quieter, but it's been very busy. And in addition to that, I love to play music.
Oh, that's great. What instruments do you play?
Guitar is my primary instrument these days, though drums used to be. But I don't know if, you know, drummers don't think of themselves as real musicians, so there you go.
My dad is a jazz musician, and he says that he plays percussion because he doesn't just play drums. And I think that might be a drummer getting out of just being pigeonholed as a drummer. But he can play a bunch of different things. He says as long as you have to hit it with a stick, he can play it.
I'm telling you, if you're playing jazz, you're at a whole different level than I am. So I don't even want to talk about it.
So, you know, I'm really curious about your story. You know, clearly you have a great passion for, delivering great customer experience and helping other companies do that. How did you get into that? How tell us the career and just life progression of Joseph Michelli getting into this field.
Yeah, I think it probably starts with the mom and dad who made it pretty clear that I wasn't on this planet to please myself and that my job was to serve others. And that servant mindset, I really think of it more as the beginning of a service professional career development path, was pretty important to me. I was lucky enough, despite their blue collar background, to get a chance to go to college, the first in my family to do so. And from there, got the opportunity to go to graduate school, studied organizational and clinical psychology. While in graduate school, got to work with a guy who ran a little fish market in Seattle, Washington, where they throw fish. And Johnny Yokoyama was pretty instrumental in my career development as well, as he trusted me to help him. And we ended up writing a story together about his floundering fish market, excuse the pun. And he, from there, that book was part of a series, in fish and when fish fly and all these other kinds of topics. And so in the context of that book, I got opportunities to work just down the block from the Pike Place Fish Market for the first Starbucks store, and wrote a couple of books about Starbucks, Ritz Carlton, and the story goes on. That
is awesome. And speaking specifically about that book on the Ritz Carlton, so that's so far the only book of yours that I've read. I've been looking at the list of titles, and clearly I'm behind, and I need to catch up. I need to do some more reading here.
You don't have to read them all. Trust me. I've read them all. I know. Probably, if you like the Ritz Carlton book, probably another one worthy of consideration would be a book about Mercedes-Benz. Not only because it's another luxury brand, but it's a different approach. Instead of a principal book like the Ritz Carlton book is, and the book about Mercedes is more of a timeline transformational journey book. And I think having consulted with them for 4 years and watched them go from 22nd in the JD Power to number 1 or 2 consistently, I really think there's something in there for people who are genuinely committed to elevate and transform their customer experience.
That is excellent. I will definitely pick that one up. That was on my list. That was actually the next one that I wanted to read. So that'll be the one for sure. I'm curious about the new gold standard. Like I said, I'm on my second time through and probably annoying my executives by pinging them with this stuff, even though it's part of my job. But I'm curious about what led you to be interested in the Ritz Carlton and then to decide to write the book.
Well, in a self-serving way, I'm really glad you're annoying them with my book. In a broader way, I'm very excited that you're annoying them in the constant pursuit of elevating customer experience, because you can't go wrong there. It's the kind of annoyance that will probably create a CEO job for you someday. What caused me to write the book? Really fundamentally, I just come off writing the Starbucks book. That was really kind of customer experience for the masses, right? And it was clear that Starbucks had created a differentiated customer experience, the coffeehouse experience, the third place experience. It definitely enabled us to have a new phenomena, affordable luxury, while having a cup of coffee. But then I realized I hadn't addressed the luxury market, and I was looking for a brand that hadn't been overwritten. So I didn't want to write about Apple. I wanted to write about a brand that had lots of gravitas in terms of reputational cachet around taking care of customers in an elevated way. And I was shocked that the Ritz Carlton had never been written about. And then when I reached out to them and I pitched the idea, I realized why they had never been written about. There's so much gravitas to this brand. The vetting process to get me in the door to be even considered to write about them was, it was arduous at best. But over time, the more that we came to a mutual trusting relationship, they just opened up the world to me. I literally traveled all over the world to write this book. I spent a month in the Millennia, Singapore, Ritz Carlton. Just crazy things happened, and it gave me a real insight into a magnificent brand.
That is amazing. Reading your introduction to the book and you talking a little bit about what that process was like, and then getting into the book and seeing just how much they let you in was absolutely incredible. For you to get a picture of what the organization is like at so many different levels. What was it like to get to experience their culture like that?
So I'll tell you, one of the most magical things is I maintained a very close friendship with Horst Schulze, who was one of the founders of the modern day Ritz-Carlton Hotel Company. So it was not only access in the context of the book writing, but it's been a lifelong relationship of somebody who's been a mentor of mine on what it means to deliver service excellence. So I would say it's changed me not only in the way I think of the world vis-a-vis the way I presented in the book, but it's been an ongoing journey well past the book on constantly pushing toward perfection in customer experience. I remember having this disagreement at the time of the book with Horst. Horst would say, if you really want to be fabulous, you have to be perfect. And I'm a psychologist. I'm like, no, Horst, there's no such thing as perfection. The pursuit of it is going to be demoralizing, blah, blah, blah. And Horst said, okay, then just be excellent. And then if it's your mom that is the 10% that doesn't get satisfied because you're content with 90%, then you explain this to me. And the whole point of it all is, I think when you're pursuing this, you have to go for perfection. Even though we may know that we can never approximate it, we can't allow ourselves to be complacent with mediocrity, which is what we might do if we're not constantly striving for better.
That is incredible. I think that it's a great thing to talk about what that means, because you hear people say a lot of times that the perfect is the enemy of the good, and that perfectionists tend to go for perfect and never actually get done. But I think that is perhaps the pendulum swinging a little too far. There is the idea of continuing to try to achieve perfect because it's an ideal. It's not necessarily a mark that we are going to hit because we don't know where it is. We wouldn't know what it is when we got there. And so I think that's fantastic. A fantastic way to look at it is always striving for that to get better. And it's clear.
So Horst is in his 80s, and he is probably the most refined customer experience delivery person you'll ever meet. And if you were to ask him, he would say, "I'm still trying to be as good as the maitre d' was when I was 13 at the first hotel I worked in." Right? And it isn't disparaging. It isn't it doesn't demotivate anyone. If anything, it really says that this is a constant, never-ending journey. If you think that customer experience excellence is a destination, you don't understand the concept. It is a process, and it's one where we have to be very, very compassionate as we go through this process because it's daunting at times. But that compassion has to be counterbalanced with performance expectations for growth. And if you keep growing, it's kind of like a football game. Like if you get a half the distance to the goal penalty, you'll never actually get to the goal if you just get penalized and penalized. You'll only be half the distance. But I think we always have to approximate another little bit closer to that impossible destination.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. And his story, I actually was emailing the CEO this morning about the power of the culture of the Ritz Carlton, the fact that maitre d' left such an impression on him that even in spite of his mother and her manager telling them that this is for important people, this will never be us, and it so inspired him that he didn't pay attention to that and one day became the president. I mean, I think that's such an amazing story. Can you tell us more about him?
Yeah, just a little bit of backstory. He was 13 at the time. They were poor in a village in Germany. He somehow got in his head he wanted to be a hotelier someday, and his mom said, that's kind of crazy. You're going to have to apprentice at a hotel. We've never stayed in a hotel, let alone the kind of upscale property. This is not us. And so he did, got on a train with his mom and went there and looked at the possibility. And this general manager of the facility, as you so aptly put, he was discouraging him too, telling him he'd probably covet the things that the refined people had, and really asked him to think twice, and he didn't. And mom got back on the train and went home. He stayed there 24/7, week after week after week, as an apprentice in the artisan craft of service in Germany. And quite frankly, in school, he wrote that little document in response to a paper saying, "We are ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen," inspired by the maitre d' who had elevated his own social status, also coming from poverty, by virtue of the service professionalism that he demonstrated. And the ladies and gentlemen guests of the Ritz Carlton, or excuse me, of that hotel, those ladies and gentlemen guests wanted that maitre d' to touch their table. So even though he was of lesser social status, if you will, he had elevated himself to be desired to have a table touch for these elevated ladies and gentlemen. So it prompted that. It became the spirit behind the Ritz Carlton today. And ladies and gentlemen of the Ritz Carlton are very honored to be called that.
I love that phrase, "We are ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen," and his description of that maitre d', just saying that he was absolute excellence. His presence every time he came into a room was felt, and that having such an impression on him, and the fact that the ladies and gentlemen at the Ritz Carlton take such pride in being called that it is such a powerful cultural thing. I mean, quite honestly, I've never stayed at a Ritz Carlton either, but I've been impressed and inspired just by hearing about the effect that has on them. That it's not about their social status; it's about their character and who they are.
So I know you would never do this, right? But let's assume you went to the Ritz Carlton for the first time, Devin, and you became very surly toward one of the ladies or gentlemen who's serving you. I have seen with my own eyes General managers approach someone like that and say, "Hey, Devin, you are a gentleman, and our ladies and gentlemen are serving you. So we need you to comport your behavior with that of a gentleman." And then let's pretend you become even more insolent, and you say, "No, no, no, no. They're a servant of mine, and I am not going to treat them any better." Well, that general manager would say, "I'm sorry, since you can't behave like a gentleman to our lady or gentleman, we will now invite you to go and stay at the Four Seasons Hotel across the street on us." Because quite frankly, this promise of ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen is reciprocal, and you can't mistreat one of our ladies and gentlemen. So as a result of that, please, no cost to you, just go across the street. And I think that's where this starts to get really interesting, right? Because in that statement is the realization that there's reciprocity, and that team members are no less important, no more important than your customers. They are equally important. And by treating people like that on your team, they are able to go out and take care of customers who treat them with reciprocal respect.
That is incredible, and I think that is, there's an element of their culture that we all want to live up to. We want to see the people around us live up to. It's kind of what we expect from each other, but we often fall short of. There's also an element of what you said there that I think is very important, is the way that they regard their own employees, and the fact that the leadership is serving the people that they are responsible for. Can you talk a little bit about that culture?
Yeah, I was actually actively doing it. So I'm writing a book, and guess what's happening? They'll have a convention somewhere, and the general manager, this was in San Francisco, and the general manager of the hotel at the time was Ed Mady. He's now the general manager of the Beverly Hills Hotel in the Dorchester collection. But Ed Mady and I run down from the convention space to flip it into a dining space. Why is the general manager of a hotel actually hands-on moving tables and schlepping things? Because they really are in the service of their teams, in the service of their customers. And, I think you can get to a place as a leader where you don't realize that that's your customer. That is the person that you're reliant on, that you need to influence so that they can influence the positive experience of your guest or your end user.
That is a huge part of my thesis around customer experience, is that, for a leader, most of your focus needs to be on making sure that employees are well taken care of, and that you're exemplifying the level of service that you want them to have. Whether you're a service company or a product company, that they're putting that into the product, they're putting that into the service because they're on the front line. You're not always going to be on the front line. That's kind of the point. You're supposed to influence people who are. So I think that is just amazing that not only did you dig into finding that out about the Ritz Carlton, but what you found was so impressive.
It's interesting because I wrote about the Ritz Carlton many, many years ago when that book was released. But I, in 2019, wrote about Airbnb, which couldn't be anything but the antithesis of the Ritz Carlton, right? I mean, it's a differentiated distribution model of homeowners who are representing a brand, and the brand is a marketplace between those who stay and those who don't. And I remember in about 2008 being at the Ritz Carlton and having this discussion about how do we stay relevant, right? How do we create an experience that's going to be relevant to consumers? And we were debating, the CEO and I, whether or not they should be able to serve beer in a bottle as opposed to the refined presentation of a glass, right? And while we're worrying about those kind of things, two guys in San Francisco were throwing air mattresses on the floor and offering, Pop-Tarts as the breakfast item in their air mattress B&B, air mattress bed and Pop-Tart breakfast. And $30 billion valuation later, when they go for their public offering this last year, it really speaks to the fact there are many, many models of delivering service. But to the greatest degree possible, Airbnb was trying to get their homeowners, thanks to a guy by the name of Chip Conley, to take that spirit of hospitality that the Ritz Carlton had, and at least try to inspire them to do that as they offer their bedroom up to a guest along the way.
Wow, that is so fascinating, and I think about the way that they started and probably some of the things that they encountered along the way. the inspiration that they needed to draw. Obviously, being able to take things from the Ritz would be a huge thing if they could actually execute it. And you having worked with them, what was it like to try to work in such a different environment where you don't have absolute control over the way that things are handled operationally?
So the beauty of this is that they were heavily reliant in their hospitality design by Chip Conley. So Chip used to be part of the Joie de Vivre hotel company, which had inspirations from the Ritz Carlton. So these things all start to commingle over time. But what he focused on was Maslowian, very Maslowian. Like, we need to take care of the primary needs of safety and security in this environment. And then we need to move up to higher stages of emotional need states, like belonging. And so if you think about the Ritz Carlton, the belonging part of the Maslowian pyramid is to make sure that everyone has a positive arrival experience. That we in the 3 steps of service from the Ritz Carlton, it starts with making sure that I give you a warm welcome to the degree that I know your name, to use your name and say, welcome Devin to the Ritz Carlton. The same sense of belonging became a very important part. If we could just get people, whether that was through email or if I handed you the keys, or just to make sure people knew you belong here at this location that you booked on the platform. That's as much as you could do when you don't have employees like they do at the Ritz Carlton.
That makes sense. I mean, even something that small, and you pointed out in the book, even something that small can leave a lasting impression on somebody. You wrote about how people actually would write back to the Ritz and talk about their experience of being welcomed, and not realizing that it was something that was operationally put in place. Not just operational, it's a cultural piece, but the fact that they spelled it out, they didn't realize that was something that people were trained to do exactly that. They just felt like they were being warmly welcomed.
Yeah, I had an incredible welcome in Jakarta. Now, they had just had a bombing in Jakarta at the Marriott, and the Marriott and the Ritz Carlton are connected. And so I went through metal detectors, because they were just in the post-bombing time period. And as I went in, all the ladies and gentlemen were lined up. It was almost like they were saying, thank you for having the courage to not be dissuaded by the terrorists. And, oh, you happen to be somebody who's writing a book about us too, so thank you for that. But there was this, and I don't expect that every time. It's a little freaky, but there was this sense of, look, I'm telling you about it now, So I think we can do that, maybe not on that grandest scale, and maybe not everything will be memorable, but why don't we just really try to make sure every single human being we interact with feels like we're excited to see them. And I remember back to when my kids were teenagers and I'd come home and they would be just so surly with me. So I would, some days I'd come home and I would just go, they're in their room, I'll leave them alone. Now, as I look back and they have kids and I think, gosh, I wish I'd have gone in. I wish I'd have just gotten home and faced whatever the challenges were. Maybe it was a disgruntled customer in another scenario. Why didn't I just say, you're welcome. I'm going to be as magnanimous as I can be and as warm and open. Whether you want to give that back or not, I want to give that to you.
I think that's such a key part of being able to make that work in the real world, because the reality is that everybody's not going to have the reaction that we necessarily expect, and it has to be done regardless of whatever you're going to get back on the other end. It has to be a part of who you are, and I think that even in the case of teenagers, I think that eventually, whether or not they get you get the reaction you want, they're going to remember that. I have to remember that when my own become teenagers.
Yeah, it'll be a lot harder when they actually do. They're very different than when they're younger. But I think the other piece of this, it has to be authentic, right? Like, you can't just fake that. You can't go, oh, I really am not all that into being with Devin, but I'm going to act like I am. I think the real issue is, I have a moment right now. We may never talk again, you and I. I don't know. I hope that's not the case. But if I don't, then this is the only moment I'm going to have to be in relationship with you. And you've taken the time to be in relationship with me. Dang it, shouldn't I give some effort to that? Or do I want to mail this in? This is not my first interview today. I'm sorry to tell you that. But I could treat you like, all right, here's another interview, right? Like, thank you. Or I could say, this is my interview with you today, and it's really important that in the time we have together, I make you feel welcome, that I serve your need to the greatest degree possible, stated and unstated, and that at the end, I do authentically have some kind of fond farewell, some kind of sense of maybe we could reconnect together, and that would be a great thing. What's so hard about that? And yet, I think what you see in business is we just don't block and tackle on the arrival, the departure, the meet the needs, particularly during transition points, during pain points, and during peak moments. And if we could just figure that out, we can decomplexify a lot of this customer experience conversation, and we can just really nail those moments. You'd be amazed at how different, much more successful your brand is.
That is amazing, and I definitely hope that it's not the last time that we talk. The fact that you've absorbed so much of this, and it's clearly become a part of who you are, and you spending so much time delving into this with so many companies. Those 3 points there really are huge. They're your first and last impression. My background is half of it is in advertising and branding and marketing. And you spend so much time obsessing over what that first impression is and what that last impression is, what people feel when they encounter you and what you want them to walk away thinking about when they leave you. It's amazing that parallel is there. You can have different mediums, but it's really the same objective. And I agree with you that focusing on those, it's a fantastic starting place to be able to improve your positioning with the people your company comes into contact with.
Yeah, and yet we know that brands are nothing more than what people say about us when we're not around, either at the business level or at the individual level. And I love how you kind of phrase that both on the thinking and the feeling component of that. What they think is going to maybe inform the words, how they say it is going to be driven by the feelings. Even if they want to tell somebody about you, it's going to be driven by the feelings. And even if they remember you, is going to be driven by the feelings. So I think we have to deliver satisfaction in a cognitive thinking kind of way. We have to perform, and then we have to make sure that we are empathic, compassionate, making the right emotional connection that creates memorableness to the interactions that we have.
That is great. I would love to get into, briefly, because I know that we're running short on time, and I do have a few more questions to ask. You talk about 5 principles in the book, that you pulled out of your time with them. How hard was it to distill that down to just 5 principles? And could you talk to us about them a little bit?
Yeah, well, so I consider myself more of a compiler and an analyst. So I don't consider myself a writer. So I have to really spend a lot of time trying to think about and synthesize the principles of an organization. But, I think whether it's define and refine a principle, which is really making sure that you know what you want people to think and feel about your brand from the onset, that you design it. I know you also have a background in artistic design, and you know the importance of planning and designing before you go through the process of creation. So, if it's a principle like that, I just really saw them having done a great job of defining their gold standards, the principles, the core of their culture, and then having to refine it because a lot of that gravitas was no longer relevant. It's the beer in a bottle sort of considerations that they had to deal with. So, those are just things that if you watch long enough, you see the trends, you come up with some of the principles, including making sure that they're delivering a more wowful, elevated kind of experience, not just something that is satisfying.
That's one of the things that I took from that. The fact that was one of the 5. Clearly, the Ritz Carlton cares a lot about delivering that wow. It's a massive part of their brand appeal, and they have to be able to deliver on that to stay in the position that they're in. There's a trend that I've seen lately in thinking and sort of voices in the customer experience space, saying that we shouldn't go for wow every time. We shouldn't think that is going to be normal. We should just try to meet people's expectations. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a couple of schools. There's one that says we should lower people's expectations so that we can over deliver. Well, much of the research on that says as soon as you start lowering people's expectation, you start setting them up for an expectation that you're not going to perform. So I think it's this effort to, wow, we're gonna create this gap and over deliver. I just don't think that's wise. I think the goal of wowing. I wrote a book about Zappos and the Zappos experience, and they're all about delivering wow through service. It's all about wow. And in a Harvard Business Review article many years back, there was "Stop trying to delight your customers" was one article, and then Tony Hsieh, the CEO, had written an article saying try to wow your customers. So the debate has been raging in such hollowed lands as the Harvard Business Review. At the end of the day, I think you have to make an emotional connection. You want to call that wow, you want to call that delight, you want to call that whatever. It's got to be something that rocks a person for a moment and gets inside of their skin. And if you don't do something, and you don't even aspire to take people up a notch, then I don't think your brand is going to distinguish itself from its competition. So to me, it's a no-brainer. You got to meet expectations. That's table stakes. That drives satisfaction. Has limited predictive validity for any kind of future spend or repurchase intent even. So then what do you have to do? Well, so you now hit the table stakes. Now we've got to get something that creates I think we're trying to create stories for customers. I want to give you a story to tell your boss. I want you to go annoy him with a story based on our time together, not just say, "Oh yeah, it was sad. It was okay. It was fine. We had a fine interview."
I think that's a great way to distill that down and really getting to the truth of the matter. The emotional connection, really is it. And we know that we make most of our decisions based on emotion. You alluded to that earlier, and I think that's a key thing for leaders to take away is that if you want to influence somebody to make a decision to come back, to buy again, et cetera, you need to focus on that emotional connection and try to make sure it's a positive one.
Yeah, and what's exciting to me is you are an emerging transformationalist in this space. I mean, you've not that you haven't been in this. I know some of the companies that you've worked with in the past, but I think you're going to be the next generation of taking customer experience to a different level. So for me, my goal would be to make an emotional connection with you because I want to be part of that energy that you carry and will carry forward. I think if we always see inside of someone this light, this possibility that they're going to do something great, or we could extinguish it, we could snuff it out with really terrible service. My job is to just really connect with what is coming at me from the customer and give them back as much as I can so they can succeed in whatever way they're wanting to do so.
I appreciate that, and I'm definitely emerging. I just really landed on all of the experiences that I've had and the different things that I've done, which have been decently wide ranging, and realizing this is one of my deepest passions. It's why I was attracted to design. It's why I was attracted to serving people, and so you're absolutely right. And you want to be able to pull out of people and see in them what really makes them come alive, and be able to connect with that. I think that's fantastic, and clearly you're great at that.
And just in the moment, you're alive with that. We're talking about something meaningful. We could be very intellectual. We could be very factual, but it's like the real thing. So because of that in my career, and I know we're about to end, but because of that in my career, I've gotten to build some really amazing relationships with people. So Horst Schulze is in my newest book, Stronger Through Adversity, as is that gentleman I talked to you about earlier, Ed Mady, who's in charge of the Beverly Hills Hotel. And the president, one of the presidents of Marriott is in the book. And this isn't even a book about hospitality, right? So there's 140 leaders in this book, the Hans Vestberg, CEO of Verizon, the Brian Cornell, CEO of Target, all because I think ultimately my job in life has been to serve others. And so when I called them in the middle of the pandemic and said, how are you doing with your service levels and your approach to your customers and your team members, they took time for me. And one of the beautiful things I've learned in my career is service serves us. If we serve well, it comes back to us. And so here's my new book, Stronger Through Adversity, 140 leaders talking about how they're serving the world through pandemic-tested times.
That's right, and I actually wanted to get into talking about that. Obviously, last year was challenging. It's probably quite an understatement. And it seems like your new book gives leaders a lot of insight from around the world and from a lot of different people who have been successful. Can you tell us a little bit about what led to the creation of the book and what that process was like?
So yeah, I'd worked with Annie Young Scribner. She used to be at Starbucks, one of the presidents there. She then went over to Godiva. Before she moved to Godiva, I had already been consulting for Godiva. So now here comes my friend from Starbucks. She's over at Godiva. She's trying to create cafe experiences at Godiva so they could go head to head with Starbucks in the morning. You could get a great mocha from a Godiva cafe. So suffice it to say, I was working with her. I was writing a book about Godiva, and by February, I couldn't get to the the plant, the chocolate plant in Pennsylvania. And so as a result of that, it was pretty clear the book was not going to happen in time for this 95th anniversary of the brand. So I was fortunately on all kinds of task forces with other clients, and I was observing leaders, and I was asking them how they were doing and what they were trying to do and where they were succeeding and failing. And they were kind enough to answer those questions, and I changed from one book and jumped into the new one, and they introduced me to even more of their friends. And before you know it, we had 140 leaders from profit, nonprofit, and from public safety organizations contributing to the book and giving us the greatest insights. And that really, I think, is a gift to the next generation of leaders. And I'm donating a portion of the proceeds to Direct Relief. So yeah, I'm really pleased that this book is out there, and it's a departure from my traditional branded customer experience books.
That is fantastic. I love that you were able to pivot that into something that could genuinely help people and leaders going through a tough time. And I know that there's going to be a temptation for a lot of folks to scale back what they're trying to deliver to their customers, to scale back the level of experience that they're trying to offer. And I know that just from what you've written about the Ritz Carlton, I know that that's not the answer. We need to find a way to continue to deliver and to serve people. So I'm glad that you wrote on the subject, and I look forward to reading that book as well. Where can people find your work?
Well, you can find most all of my books on Amazon, but you can also just visit my website at josephmichelli.com. That's Joseph, MICHELLI.com. And it'll, we do a lot of free live streams and lots of free content every week. So it's not as though I just want you to go and buy one of my books. There are links to those books there if you want to select any of them, though.
Awesome. So I have one last question. You have worked with so many different companies that are in so many different industries. You've written so many books about companies that have done great at actually delivering great customer experience consistently. What do you find to be the most unifying common thread through the companies that you've worked with that wind up figuring out how to do this?
It's so simple, it's almost embarrassing to answer your question. I think that there are leaders who get the only way you survive is by creating value for others. And then there are those who think others should create value for them. And so the common theme is that the group of leaders that take these brands to meteoric heights are the ones who understand that we are in the business to serve. Peter Drucker, the consultant, once said, "You're not in business to make a profit. You're in business to make a customer." And I think if you get that, the profits will come.
That's awesome. That is absolutely awesome. Joseph, thank you so much for being willing to be on the show. I have so much more that I could ask, but I hope that I can grab an hour of your time again to be able to talk about more of your work and more of your insights. Really appreciate the work that you've done in this field. And really hope that everybody got a lot out of this today. I know I certainly did.
So I'll do it contingent on one thing, that the next time we get together, it is a dialogue where I get to ask you some questions about your thinking on some of the same topics that you're asking me about. If we can do that and we can learn from each other, I am here for you.
Man, I appreciate that, and I'm all about it. Happy to do that anytime.
Good. Well, thank you for having me, and thanks for your audience for taking the time and sharing something so precious, which is their attention.
Awesome. Thanks, Joseph.